Okay, hey there. I'm just going to do a bit of a video here just for my own, like pretty much for myself. Um, I want to do it on my latest theories and understandings of art and also manga and writing. So I do try and understand how they all work together because essentially without understanding how they work together, it's not going to be as easy to develop the kinds of things that I want to develop. So I try to figure out how it's all working and how it all functions as a sort of unified whole. And this wasn't something I was even close to capable of before. So the kind of understandings that I even have now, even if they're not going to be perfect, I'm still pretty happy with them because they're giving me um, at least some level of understanding that helps me, that's going to help me achieve what I want to achieve. Okay, so I just want to start with the explanation of a very simple scale. Um, and on one side, you have exposition. This is where people are sort of talking about something, just like outlaying the world or what happens. Like, oh, Mary is a high school girl who gets bullied a lot, and she faces up against her rival, and I don't know, becomes popular through the whatever. Like you're just saying something, the person's not experiencing it moment by moment. It's more limited. It's more caricaturish. It's just step by step by step bullet points. While on the other side, you have description. Um, so a description is just that you describe every single detail. So uh, how Mary wakes up, how she brushes her teeth, how she eats her cereal in the morning, how she gets ready before school, uh, the texture of the door handle as she goes to um, head out, the kind of grass there is, the sounds and the settings that are happening as she's walking to school, different things she passes, like a trash can and like a cat and whatever. So if you're if you're basically doing description, there is something called beats. And beats are just, like I said, like the trash can, the cat, the doorknob, the grass, the wind, the whatever. So these specific little things that are happening, like it could just be little actions or whatever, these are beats. And whenever you're describing something, you use more beats than if you use exposition. Exposition basically is used for story and plot. Um, and so you have this scale of beats and plot. Um, they're just basically like this similar scale. And there is similar scales for multiple different things that basically match up in the same way. So in writing, it's description and exposition. But in, say, something like drawing, you have elements of a drawing. So, elements of a drawing and complexity versus simplification. So, for example, a simplification of an angry character might be that they have a triangle head and triangle eyes or something. Like maybe that's the simplification of the The angry character, I don't know. It looks like he's smiling, but okay. While elements and complexity, it's going to be much more like, I don't know, whatever. So even if it's this angry character, maybe there's like some specific like energy to it, and like maybe you're creating it a certain way. I don't know, um, whatever, and I don't know. So maybe there's some way that you're expressing that aggression and that character with a different format rather than something simplified. You're doing it something complex. And so I believe that there is um, a constantly connected sort of set of rules and stuff here. Um, just a second. And because I have a file. Okay. So, uh, so I can better explain this. Okay. All right. So, description and exposition is probably the best way to describe this. So, if we just take this and we basically just take that to three different levels. So, with manga, how does this affect things? Writing, how does this affect things? And drawing, how does this affect things? Okay, so description in writing is just simply that. You just go through every single piece of information that the person interacts with. Um, while exposition is you shortcut to plot points. Is you just say like this happens and this happens and then this happens. Like just basically telling someone a timeline rather than them experiencing that timeline. So when we write, we can just think of it like a healthy balance of writing is going to be somewhere in the middle. It's not going to be completely on one side or the other. And you're hoping that at some times during the story, you're going to be more descriptive. And at other points in the story, you're going to be more expositional. You're going to be more descriptive of a story and moving things through. So when you're drawing, there's a connection here, which is that exposition is going to have more panels and frames. So the exposition is going to happen more rapidly, and so it's going to have more information and more processes happening, and all these little things are going to be simpler. So you could have like person walk, right? Um, and then person fall, but then person get up, but then person, uh, I don't know, get up, um, but then person yell at other person who's on floor. Then two people fight, and then one person lose while other person like wins. Okay, so you're not describing each thing. You're basically taking it through plot points. Just these things are happening sort of one after the other. And those kind of like that that takes it to a position of exposition. But essentially all these frames are what I would just call um, visiting visiting frames. Or through frames that you just the point is just to go through them and just be like, oh, that happens, and oh, that happens, and oh, that happens, and oh, that happens. And then you have descriptive frames. These are generally going to be larger frames with multiple elements. So a person has walked or whatever, and there's like a trail that leads back here, and then there's like this thing from where they've come from, and then maybe there's like this, like a trash can or something here, and then maybe, I don't know, certain trees back here or something, and maybe you can see like this, and maybe even see like a butterfly or whatever, and this is descriptive. So you're slowly creating this description of something, like maybe we close up on this face, and we do that to sort of see more about their emotion and emotional state or whatever. And then maybe we zoom in even closer to like the eye with much more detail and whatever on that eye, so that you can tell more about the emotion or whatever. And maybe you then zoom back out and the person is like sighing or something. So this is descriptive, while this is more expositional. And so when you're creating a story, like I said, you want to be using things that are in the middle. You don't want to be just describing things, and you don't want to be just using exposition. So probably earlier cartoons were just expositional in nature. Each frame is some specific part of a story, a part of a fable, a part of a biblical story, something like that, and just tells you step by step something that happens. And then later you get things that are more descriptive. Um, and that's also true in the evolution of like cartoons and anime. So, for example, Miyazaki's Castle in the Sky, which was one of the first sort of really advanced sort of animation, anime sort of that was created. Um, Castle in the Sky, it would do things like it would just have like a moment where there's a girl and the hair would like flick here, like flick, and then like maybe it would flick down here, and then maybe it would like flick up here, and like it would transition between different flickings of hair, so that you would have this cycle of something. So there might be an element in the scene. There might be an element in the scene where there is a moving piece or moving effect that that is expanded upon just to help describe it. And that might be also true of like a skirt. So like there might be a skirt hem that is flapping in the wind. So you have someone that's hanging on to something, and like, I don't know, foot, whatever, and their skirt is flapping in the wind. Uh, and this would have multiple different changes to it as it's flapping to give more attention and more elements to details that are being explained. So if you're going to add more elements, add more details, add more complexity, it's going to describe things more and take you more into the moment. While if you don't want to take people into the moment and you want to get them over the hill, like, okay, so in order to describe an event, you need to get people from the start of the hill, like this is the starting point. You need to get them to extra information and burden or whatever. You need to get them to the top of the hill where the big conflict is happening. Then you need to get them sort of over the hill until you can reach the point at which they understand what the story is. So you're basically taking people over a hill. And if you're busy describing all these elements that you have along here, then you're basically taking people laterally along this process and just like extending this process. Like, oh, we've got more time like on each part. And so when you're drawing or doing manga or whatever, you want to understand that the complexity of the manga is going to increase the more you add description to the story. So a lot of people, they'll reduce the description and just make it much more comic-y, because they don't want to spend time creating this immersion that's coming from the description. But like I said, a better story is a combination of the two, and it's never completely one of the extremes. You don't want it to be completely exposition. You don't want it to be completely description based in either case. So with description, so with your descriptions, there are points in time where description is much better. So at the start of a story, or or at the start of a scene, or the start, or the introduction of something. Because basically you need descriptions to create a lexicon for people to be aware of what's actually happening. Okay, so start in the introduction of things. This is where it's better to be more descriptive. And where it's better to be expositional is if, for example, you need to get somewhere. So you need progress. So you're in one part of the story and you need to get to the next. Like, oh, okay, I want to get to XYZ scene sooner. Then this is going to give you speed. But this is going to give you much more sort of content where you are. So you start to think, when do I want like this weight on things? Like when do I want to press on a concept and make it much more with more emphasis? versus when do I want less emphasis and just speed it along. And so if you start to think in terms of a manga as about description and exposition, and often people talk about exposition as a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing. It's just an extreme simplification. Um, so exposition, and we have description. And in between these, we're going to have like intros should be the most descriptive, while transitions should be the most expositional. And earlier parts of the scenes, so setup, should be more descriptive than than the mechanics. Not necessarily not the mechanics, so you have the setup of the scene and the progress of the scene. So for example, things like dialogue, versus character reaction. So dialogue, you know, it's going to be much more rapid, as just sort of like a sequence that gets done and happens and is gone through. You're going to set up like just what that dialogue sequence is, and it's just going to go boom, boom, boom. But if you're going to be drawing like the reactions, like maybe you have like someone's eye here, and I don't know, they're hopeful, and then they're suspicious or angry, and then they're suddenly shocked, you know, so like whatever. So you've got like this reaction and then this reaction, then this reaction, and you're saying like, okay, well, I want to describe their reaction between each different step of exposition. And so now you're creating something that's switching from this to this and going back and forth. Where, say, this one might have like a larger frame, and then this one might have a smaller frame, because this one is just verbal, while this one, you know, it's like the character is, you know, talking or whatever, and then this character is like, you know, now shocked, like, whoa, no way. And it's like, yeah, way. And you're creating this extra descriptive aspect to what's being drawn there. So knowing when you're being more expositional, more shortcutty is important. Now, there's another thing that I understand recently, which is when you're drawing a face, so you're drawing a face and you, I don't know, you just set up your face, boom, whatever. And I don't know, let's do it like this. So you've got whatever face it is that you're drawing. There are two ways to add identity to this face. One is through big shapes. So you could add like, okay, so this person actually has a triangular um, eye structure. This person has um, just circular hair or like rectangular hair. Like, I know that looks terrible, but you're like, oh, okay, rectangular hair, that's how you identify this person. And this sharpness of the eye is how you identify them. And maybe they have a specific feature that identifies them rather than the other people or whatever. So you could use big sort of features like sharp or whatever. You say like this is sharp and like that's what this person's like. Or what you can do is you can do small adjustments, small identifying adjustments like, oh, you know, they've got like this curve that's a bit softer, and actually we don't want to have like that. We're gonna just adjust it just a little bit so that he just looks like a little more annoyed rather than massively exaggerating it. We're gonna make it a little softer and just go here, and there's like a specific identity that they have, a specific gestural quality that they have. And like, yeah, while they might have a little bit of that, like right now they don't have a lot of it. And, you know, we're not going to go like this crazy sort of super defined hair. We're going to just create it, keep it natural, and just add a little bit here, a little bit there that makes it look like this person has a specific character that is constant or whatever. And so in this way, you could create something identifying by just little descriptors. So small indicators, small changes, and you keep things more natural looking. Or you can go the other route, which is more symbolic and more about shape. And this is going to be organic, and this is just going to be geometric. So simplifications that become more symbolic, geometric, or whatever, they're on this expositional side. And they're more to just get progress. For example, if you have a character that's just like angry all the time or whatever, that like just making it more symbolic is going to be helpful for transferring the information quickly. While if you want people to sort of relate to a character a lot, then you want to have sort of softer designs, which are more descriptive. And so making something a little bit more artistic and soft or whatever, yeah, you might lose some of this shape and geometry simplifications, but that's okay if that's what you want. because maybe you want to make it descriptive, maybe you want to keep people's attention on that panel for a bit longer so that they're like, oh, okay, and maybe they can get immersed. And so immersion is about how you're specifically using the combination of exposition and description. And so, for example, if you are writing and you look at this, you could look at it like, I want to describe the life of an adventurer, like let's say lesser adventurer, right? You want to talk about the lesser adventurer's life. And so maybe what you do is you want to describe a sequence of like events that lead up to something. Like maybe that, like I created a sequence of events that just sort of introduce you to a character, um, that then takes us just to the start point where you've met the character. So let's say in Lesser Adventurer, it's guy gets job, let's say gets job, walks somewhere, cleans, gets bit, awakes, let's just say amnesia. So this sort of thing is like, oh, okay, this is really just one larger step of he gets bit while cleaning. I could literally say that in one sentence, like, I was on a cleaning job and got bit. Stupid uh, disease stole my memories, or whatever. Like you could literally do that with like three cuts. Like working, cleaning bars, right? Like you got a dude and he's cleaning bars, and then you have like maybe you have like a rat here or something, and then the rat snatches onto his arm, and he's like, ouch, or whatever. And so you have this biting on his arm, he's like, ouch, and then you could have him like wandering around, question marks, like, and then you just say like, I was cleaning and got bit, a stupid disease stole my memories. Like you could just literally do it like that. But instead, in Lesser Adventurer, I did it much more descriptively. Like I took it through more steps, so that I could describe and create an immersive like element to that experience, so that you can kind of like relate more to the character and just feel like how they react to things, the different emotions that they have, and so on. So sometimes you want to get a person more immersed and experience each step rather than jump to the conclusions. because you want them to experience the emotional thing or extra descriptive factors that give them more information, more intuition, and ideas on things. But other times, maybe we're like, oh, I don't want to like follow this guy through every day that he has, like where he's doing mundane things. Maybe I want to get to him where he's actually strong. And to get to him where he's strong, I have to skip pieces of information that are in the story. Like he might spend like 3 months working his way back to strength. And you can do that with one scene. You can say, it took me 3 months. You can just basically say 3 months later, or whatever. And then you can just describe shortly what happened in those 3 months. And then you can say, and then all of a sudden I was strong. Wow. Or you can decide how you want to break it down, how much of it you want to describe, how much of it you want it to be immersive. Do you want to immerse someone to the point where they experience all the frustrations, tribulations, all the information of how they progressed? Or where you sort of go through the grind with them? Or do you want to maybe make a little bit of a story that helps you skip from lily pad to lily pad, where this sort of stuff is a bit the same. So you're really telling the story from these little variations and points that are different. Like, oh, there was once a week where it rained. There was once a week where we got lost. There was once a week um, where we ran into another adventurer and had to save them. And if you do that, it becomes episodic, which is somewhere in between exposition and description. So you've got the description and you've got exposition. Well, your episodic sort of thing is more here. Or if you want to explain like the mechanics of how they improved, that's more here. And the grind for resources or money, that's more here. And maybe you even want a combination of both. Like sometimes you want them to be grinding, and then other times you want to take it to something more episodic. And you have to think, well, what effect does this have on the story? How do I want to influence that? And so on. So this is kind of something that I've been realizing lately is just when I'm constructing a story or even constructing a paneling for something, and you say like, oh, I'm going to do a panel and it's going to describe this, and then there's going to be another panel that's going to describe this, and then we've got another panel. I would be looking at this and saying, well, how did you design that panel? You thought of that panel, and maybe this is a more descriptive panel. And what about these two? How much of the story do we want to get through here, and how quickly? Because these might have to be more expositional. And if we're using a descriptive panel, it's going to have multiple compositional elements that where things like multiple things are happening. And it's going to have to set up these expositional panels, expositional panels, so that when these are happening, say maybe you even have like multiple panels here that just happen or whatever, and like different things happen through this. And then maybe you then go into a thing where, oh, there's multiple elements here, and we describe how this one goes from this point to this point here as well. So maybe you're going from something descriptive, then you're going to something more expositional, then you're coming back to something descriptive again, and then maybe it ends on something like expositional. I don't know. So conceptualizing how you're going to describe a story is always going to come back to those differences. And I feel like all stylization comes back to these differences too. Like whether you're doing something like, oh my God, I've got like this evil character. Wow. And then, oh, I've got this other character, which is, I don't know, there's an organic whatever, and it's more like, I don't know, there's more detail and there's more whatever that's connected to how they're reacting to the situation. Like it's a bit more artistic or whatever. Like, okay, if you're doing something that has like this sort of thing versus this sort of thing, this is going to be more static. And this is something you're going to be more repeating over and over. So this requires like a constant model or character design. This can be more of a one-off. Because ultimately, if you make a complex character, if you then just do that on an expositional scene, you can just create like a simple version of that character, and it doesn't matter because they still know that's like the character or whatever. So you're like, oh, okay, so I can do like these big static one-offs, and then I can maybe jump back to something that has more stylization, like a bit more angularity or whatever. And you can be like, okay, well, I want a big descriptive scene, and I want this of the city. Like there's a big city, and like, and how's this work? And like person standing on a hill, and they've got a cape, and it's like looking over it, and they see this city, and all this stuff's happening in the city, and you're like, yeah, I want to set up that city so that then when they're walking through the city and different things are happening there and whatever, that we're telling different events, that we know what context because it's set up. So I try to think of it this way, where I'm like, okay, how much am I setting up something? Then how am I doing the plot structure? What am I trying to skip to? What am I skipping to in this sequence? This sequence, what is it cutting out? What is it shortcutting? So maybe here, what is it shortcutting? Going down the hill, going into the city, entering the city. Okay, so then maybe you do like a quick thing where a person walks through a gate. Maybe they look and see a sign which says in. And then they sit and have a meal. Like, I don't know. Yum. And then maybe say hi to someone. Hi. And then are taken to an adventuring board where there's stuff on there. And this person is like going, look at this. You see this? And so you've seen this, and then bump, 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 bump. And then we go back to here, and then, I don't know, maybe you've got something where they've got the adventure quest, and maybe there's other adventure quests. And like it tells you different things about the world because you're able to view this board and see what information's on it. And so you've just gone like, oh, okay, so here, and then we've gone to like these things that skip through a period of time, and then I want people to be able to stay on this thing and gain a lot of information from it. And so, and then maybe he like grabs the thing off the wall, I don't know, like just takes the thing, whatever, and then waves goodbye. And then leaves back out the door, or something, with I don't know, a backpack on and a sword on their hilts, you know, whatever. So specifically how you structure this page is going to be connected to all these different ideas rather than you just saying, hey, I need a panel and I'm just randomly going to create a panel. It's instead understanding the description that's required and the expositional sort of skipping that's required, like the skip. Because sometimes you just need it to skip along nice and quick, and other times you need it to be more descriptive. So just taking that into consideration. Now, I believe this applies to all three things. It applies to drawing, it applies to writing, and it applies to manga. The way that I view things is writing is typically a bit more descriptive. As a medium than drawing is. But drawing is drawing is more effective at communicating things in a symbolic way. So it is more expositional. So people feel like they're progressing much faster through the story if they're reading it or watching it than if they're listening to something that's written or they're reading something that's written. So, and for me, manga is in between. So the manga is more generally in a balance between the descriptive and the expositional. While, you know, more cartoons are more on this end, and um, well, we don't really have like maybe like visual novels or something like where, or like games where you read a lot. They're a bit closer to like in between here. So there's a scale of this sort of thing and what they do. So I think with writing, it pays to create quick plot points, so that you actually get places within your chapter. So you have like plot goals. Goal for chapter. Um, while with drawing, it's not so much you have a plot goal, but you have something you want to set up. So um, establish, establish scene, establish character, likability. So your goal with drawing is going to be different than the goal that you have of your plot, and so on. So when you're drawing something, you want to make sure that the elements establish everything that you need. And when you're establishing things, it's things like the stage, characters, props, interactions, the world, and how everything sort of works together. You want to be setting these up with your drawings. So any drawing is going to have to be designed in such a way that it tells you about the model of characters, the structure, the sizing, the nature of the world, how it works, different props, the actions people take, so that people know the rules, um, and consistency of things. While when you're writing, it's not about setting up the rules and the consistency of things. That is a part of writing, but you're probably just trying to, while you're describing everything, which may have these other elements in it, you try to get to points like different lily pads. So moving from scene to scene, um, describing a person's opinion and then another person's opinion. So fleshing out the characters' perspectives, fleshing out the actions that they took, the different places that they were, the descriptions of things they saw and events around them, and and then what took them, or what caused them to change scene or to enter a different scene, whether that was motivated by something external or whether that was motivated by themselves and just like the general momentum that they have. And so you're just trying to understand how this is happening and then how you're going to be doing this. And then what that does is it helps you understand that when you're going to be creating a manga and you're going to be creating this, like which ones do I need to use to create plot goals, and then which ones do I need to establish things. And you're going to have a list of things that you need to establish, um, with like illustrations, and then you're going to have a list of things that you're going to have to establish with the writing. And so, it's a bit weird because it's a little bit inverse here. Like the writing, for example, can help you do exposition, or it can help you do more description, and vice versa. You can use pictures, like little symbolic pictures, to help you with the exposition, and then you can use more painterly designed whatever to help you with descriptions of places and so on, and keep people there. And so you want to then figure out which ones, what combination are you using to fill out a page, and then you figure out how to streamline this. because you can't scale a drawing or a manga or even writing unless you can figure out how to streamline the process of how you're going to describe this story. Um, so you're always looking at things as I could do it this way, but if I keep doing it this way, is it going to get too complex? And then you might be like, I can do it this way for a certain period of time, but then I have to reduce the complexity so that it can move along as a story, so that it doesn't get stuck. And then we can reach another point at which we can expand the description again, and so on. So you're going to have periods of your chapters that are going to be more streamlined, and other ones that are going to be much more filled with like bloated aspects of description and different reactions and so on. And you don't want to just do that arbitrarily. You want to do that in the right position, the right spot, because otherwise you're spending way too much effort on something that's not going to have a result. So yeah, this is what I've been thinking about recently, um, pretty excessively actually. Um, like, for example, um, different things that you can set up um, are just like stages and characters. They're the most important things to set up, and possible actions and mechanics. Like you can't not set up a stage because then you're doing it in a void and you don't want to be doing it in a void. Like that would be bad. And if you're not doing it with characters, then you're doing it with like mannequins that have no flavor, no personality. And if there's no actions or mechanics, then it's just like a puppet show. So you want to make there to be complexity in actions and reactions. You want to make sure there's complexity in characters so that they're not just mannequins, and you want to set up stages effectively. And those are like the most important things that you have to do. You can also do other things like effects, like showing the wind and stuff like that, but that's just going to be more descriptive stuff. So you don't necessarily need that, but you need these. You need these ones. And so when you are doing these ones, there's a stage I would call production, where once you have designed these things, there's other complex aspects that can come into it. So there is the character model and stage model and stage models. This can just be something as simple as notes, like, oh, the room was uh, 25 feet across and 15, like 20 feet high or something. Or what is it? Not 20 feet high. That's crazy. Maybe like 10 feet high. So you're like, oh, the stage model is 10 by 25 by, I don't know, 20 or something. And that's like what the stage's sort of setup is. And maybe the models is like one person is like 5'4", another person is like 5'7" or something. You're like, okay, so now I know this, and then there's another character, they're like 6'2". And you might just have these simple sort of setups, um, And you could just say like, oh, this person's small, this person's medium, this person's large. Like they're just wearing different shirts, like their shirt size is different. Um, and you just know that this character has this proportion and aspect that then connects to the room. And so if you're going to create a room and you create the room and you do the perspective or whatever of the room, you just roughly set up something that's kind of correct. And you also know that like, oh, because this is 10 foot high, you know, this 6'2" person is going to be like here, and the 5'4" person is going to be like here. And so you know that you've got like these perspective lines for them. So, okay, I got like the little person here, and then, you know, big person is here. And so, you know, you've set up something that's kind of reasonable and sits within the range of like how you've modeled it or how you set it up. So production not only has things like that measurement thing, there's also where the light source is from. So you could have the light source from this corner of the room or from this corner of the room, or you could have it from the bottom. Um, and maybe you want this from the bottom here because then that creates like this big, larger shadow on the wall, right? Or something like that. Like maybe that's the go-to for the lighting of this scene. Or maybe you want it to be coming down this way so that this comes across like this, and this person's like I don't know, they've got like a smaller one that's going back like this. And so this looks massive or huge. So depending on your choice of camera and light angle and so on, you can select those things. You can also, instead of just selecting light, you can also select camera angle. So camera angle can be like from behind, but then you could have a camera angle coming from underneath the person to see up on the side of their face. And then you could have like a camera angle coming down on this person. And then uh, maybe you could have a camera angle from their feet leading back up towards this person and sort of going above them so that you can see things in a dramatic way. And so now you've created something which is a production idea of like, oh, well, which camera angle are we going to use? Which light angle are we going to use? Um, how are we going to manage the background? How are we going to manage the midground, like the midground of the shot? And then what sort of elements are going to be in the foreground? Like maybe you've got something here and something here obstructing the way, which you can see. And like what foreground elements are we going to have? So you think about the foreground, you think about the midground, you think about the background, you think about the camera angles that you might shoot, the light angles that you might use. Then you think about like the color and theme, color and theme. So with this, what do we want? Do we want cold, cold, blue? And where would we want the warmth in the scene? Where would we want neutrals? And you consider that kind of thing if you're creating like a color scheme. You will also think about not just the shadow and the light direction, but also how light versus dark you want the whole thing. So do you want it to be a very dark scene, or do you want it to be relatively light? And why? And and setting that up so that you have those stylistic considerations before you start thinking about, oh, okay, and then how does this show all the actions and mechanics? How does this show the characters? How does this set up the stage and show the stage? Um, and so this is kind of the thing I've been thinking of, that whenever you're doing something like creating a manga or whatever, there are certain consistent objective things that are in the background of everything that you do. And it's up to your choices of whether you're going to be more descriptive or you're going to be more expositional and skip through things as to how developed you want to make this. And if you've figured out like how you're going to pace things, like whether it's going to go through quick or it's going to go through slow, or whether you're going to go really deep into the mood, scene, setup, lighting structure, make that very intentional, make those camera angle changes super effective, you know, you can do that as well. So, and this is what I would just call like production value. So, do you want to have a high production value? Do you want it to be immersive? If it's immersive, it needs to have more description. If it's production value, it needs to have these considerations. If it's something that is just story and quick, then it needs to be almost expositional. It needs to be quick. It needs to be symbolic. It needs to be with like more shape language. So, do you want to do all this, or do you want to like use shapes, or do you want to, how are you going to be describing all the actions and mechanics? Do you want how do you specifically want to do the characters? How do you want to set up the stages? And then how do you want to blend these? Like, how are you doing them in scenes where you're introducing and setting things up? How are you doing them differently when you're going through the process? And yeah, so this is kind of my theory on how things work. I'm pretty sure it's pretty good. Um, I mean, there's other things too, like I forgot prop and costume design, but that's mostly it. Um, and there's also processes of how you're going to be creating the thing and also how you're going to be editing it later. So, like what kind of options you want. So, for example, if you're going to be doing a very professional manga, I think it's better not to draw it in panels. It's probably better to draw it, say, like you say, oh, this is a D1. I want this like super descriptive, while this one's like a D3 or something. And then you just mark that in a panel and you just create the scene. And you say, like, on this, I want to describe stage X, and I want to have character uh, A or whatever, and there is a specific action occurring or whatever, and you just use like a specific card or whatever, and then you set up the scene, and you do that in like D1, or maybe you can also set up something that does it in D3 but from a different angle. So D1 is the top down angle, and maybe the D3 is like over shoulder. So if I was doing something with high production value, that's the route I would go. Is you have to like pre-design, and then you have to understand that there's going to be a post-processing stage to design. So you've got like development, then you've got pre-production, then you've got production, and then you've got post-production. And so you would want to design these things with post-production in mind. That's how it's going to be put together. It's not going to be put together ad hoc. It's going to be put together properly in post-production. And so with production, then it's just about that when people do this, that they have a fast way to execute on it and ways to know specifically what they're doing, why they're doing it, and that they have a process that they can just go through and make that work. And then when you have pre-production, that's all about like setting this up, like setting up what scenes, what structures, whatever. And development, this is about like the pacing, and the story structure. Like where you need things and what sort of setup there's going to be. So keeping in mind all of that, like the true manga isn't going to come together until post-production anyway. And so like how are you specifically doing these phases and how are you setting them up? And so to me, that's why I think of all this, like description versus exposition. That's the simplest way I can break down how stories work. Then understanding whether I want specific effects or whether I want it to be like more cartoony, more angled or whatever. Like understanding that the more depth we give this, the more pages it's going to run, the more complex it's going to be, the more you're going to need illustrators rather than just character designers and quick sort of, and just like writing. Like it's very easy to do writing if the drawing style is simple. But if the drawing style is more complex, maybe it's more immersive and it can help bring out different factors of the writing. So which do you need? And then, even scenes where you have dialogue and you might think, oh, there's only really one way to do dialogue. You could go very beat heavy with all the different emotions and reactions people are having, or you could go more dialogue, switch, 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 switch. It's just a face with an open mouth, face with an open mouth, face with an open mouth, word, 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 and maybe there's something happening in the background or something that makes it interesting. Like maybe that's how you set it up, or like, what are you doing there? Um, then whether you're using something that's descriptive or you're using and much more natural, or you're using something that's like more shaped and geometrical. Figuring out like how you want to partition the story, whether you want it to be like more episodic or you want to like take through every single grinding little step. Thinking about that, understanding that if you're going to tell your story that way, it's going to limit it. It's going to limit its length and how much you can cover if you keep it super descriptive. But if you keep it super simple, then loads of stuff can happen, but no one's ever going to get like super involved and super immersed in it. So what's the trade-off? Which one are you doing? And then, how are you combining these? What are the combinations? Are you combining these on the page or within the drawing or between pages, or is it just within the chapter, or do you have a descriptive chapter and then a less descriptive chapter that's more expositional, and then like how are you specifically going to structure this composite of these two strategies? Then making sure that you have correct goals for each of those things, whether that be plot goals for certain chapters and so on, or whether it be you need to establish things. And how are you going to establish that? Are you going to establish that effectively, or is it just not going to be established properly? And then looking through it and looking through the production value, looking through the schedule of where you want to be at the end of it, and sort of setting up like all the proper staging, all the proper like costuming, all the proper lighting, all the proper like color themes, all the proper camera angles that you want to hit for the specific thing. Um, and then making sure everything's consistent or consistent enough that a person that's watching it can trust that what they're seeing is accurate enough to the reality that they can suspend disbelief and then basically say like, oh, this is the thing. I'm feeling the actual place here. It's not just an estimate. It's not just a guess. And yeah, then basically setting that up in such a way that you postmark what you need to be doing, where you need to be doing it, why you need to be doing it, and so on. People could create lists, they could create anything. It can just be held in your mind as to what you're doing. It doesn't really matter, but like this process is part of manga. It's also part of writing. Um, if you want to like write in a where you want a very specific result to come out the end, like you want to control the result rather than just fly by the seat of your pants. Um, I think they call it more architectural. And it is good to be architectural. It's also good to like fly by the seat of your pants, but it just depends on what kind of project you're making, right? Um, and so all these different thoughts, all these different ideas, this is kind of just I envision like creating a proper cycle that I want to go through to create different stages of something. Like, oh, I've got like a stage here that I want this to have happen, and then I got a stage here where I want this to happen. Got a stage here where I want this to happen, a stage here where I want this to happen, a stage here where I want this to happen. And when I'm setting up this phase here, I want to be looking back to this phase here. Um, and then when this phase is done here, or we have a little bit of information from this phase here, it says we have to look back at this phase and communicate with that one. So maybe you have to do a bit of this first, then a bit of this second, and then a bit of this like third. And so you start to understand like, yeah, you might have a specific cycle that has a specific direction that it's going in, but that doesn't mean you know the sequence. The sequence might be that this this part has to talk to this part, has to talk to this part, and it's going to be mixed up. And so you create like a setup of like relationships where they have to talk to each other, when they need to talk to each other, how they need to talk to each other. And when you're setting up your manga, you need to either intuitively or logically understand what parts are connecting to each other, where they're influencing things, and that's going to affect things like, okay, so let's say the first thing that we did was pacing. And the second thing we did was like modeling. And uh, modeling and goals or something. And then maybe the other thing is streamlining specific aspects. and then you've got this thing, and this is going to be the actual maybe illustrations, and maybe even some post-processing. And then you might have something like distribution up here. And so, for example, your distribution is going to affect like what your modeling and goals are. It's going to affect like what the pacing is. It's going to affect like how you streamline the process. It's going to affect how you illustrate the process. And then your pacing is going to influence like this, and it's going to influence that. And so they're all going to be influencing each other in a kind of ecosystem. And you want to understand like what that ecosystem is. So, I mean, this would be normal in a company or whatever, but as like one person developing the manga, like I just feel like it's probably too difficult a task to just take things on panel by panel and just go, oh, I'm just gonna be perfect at doing these things, creating them panel by panel. Because, yeah, you might be able to do that, but I imagine that is incredibly difficult because you're going to over describe things and then you're going to not add in enough plot points and transitions. So then you're going to have to redo those points. And ultimately, the reason why you do multiple shots and from multiple angles in like developing a movie is so that you don't have to redo everything a million times. Instead, you just put it together in post processing. So it's just about making your life as easy as you possibly can by understanding the system that you're working within. Like, yeah, okay, some frames are going to be super descriptive, other frames are going to be like, just get the point done. And you don't want to be confusing those. You want to be separating them appropriately, doing the appropriate effort on each specific one, and being able to analyze where you've missed the boat. Like, hey, in this thing, it's the background that's failing it. And in this thing, it's, the midground is failing it. And in this thing, we need to add something in the foreground. And this one is actually about the lighting that is messed up. This one is about the color theme. It just doesn't suit. So then we need to change the color theme on this one. We need to change the lighting scheme on this one. We need to change the background on this other one. And so you want to have it set up in a way that's modular, that considers that you're going to have to change things in post. You're also going to have to understand an ecosystem. So you don't want to develop everything all at once. You want to develop useful things that are going to be useful for other teams, other parts of the organization, and then sort of slowly accumulate everything in as useful of a way as possible so that it all gels together. And that is, in my opinion, the skill of developing manga is it's this. And that's also true of writing as well. So when you're writing things, it's a little bit different than this, but it's mostly similar. Like you want to be able to understand where you're pacing things, where you're going, the kind of models and goals you want to know, how you're going to streamline that process, how you're going to get certain information across, and then, how are you specifically going to make sure that you've met all the goals that you needed to meet, and then what are you doing in regards to like distribution and the kind of audience retention that you want and who you want to read the story, because that's going to affect everything else. And so I'm just looking at all of these factors and I'm trying to like put it together like some form of clockwork. I don't know how it works together yet, which shows why like this is all messy. But I think in a little bit of time, I'll be able to like put that clockwork together. And then with that clockwork together, I'll be able to know very specifically what's required for each thing. Like, how important is light? How important is color and theme? How important is costume design? How important is like the pacing that we're using for conversation and dialogue? How important is it to have multiple options for post processing? Is that super important, or is it something that we can skip over? Um, and then knowing how to streamline processes, development of like different pictures and so on. Like I don't just want to be rushing into it blind. I want to like understand all of this first so that I can get a good look at it. I mean, eventually I might try and create like an animation studio. So like if I was to do that and do animation or something, or to create a sort of manga studio or something, even if it's small, I'd want it to be effective. And so all this information is super important, even just as a single artist. So those are my ideas, and I just thought I'd get them out of my head so I can potentially listen to this again and then figure out where the flaws are and just think through it properly. So yeah, that's it. And I hope that helped anyone that was particularly keen on listening to this kind of theory. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that'll help me get much stronger. Um, I mean, knowing what to improve at is part of how you learn faster. And if I can figure out what I need to learn here, then I should be able to know exactly what areas I need to improve at, and how impactful they'll be. So that's the aim. Um, and then everything here, you've got to make sure everything here has a cohesive style. Like everything merges together. All the transitions are good. All the transitions are smooth. Everything that happens in a way that is almost seamless, that people don't even notice what's happening behind the scenes because it's just so fluid. And I feel like that is what's behind like the entertainment industry, is just to get all these things working. Obviously, if you're doing movies and stuff, there's, hiring the right people, the right location scouters, the right like equipment, the right setup, the like right lighting, the right set design, all those things and whatever. So I think manga is essentially that, but then you also need the skills to illustrate, character design, and also write the story, also direct the story, also all of those things. So to do that at a high production value is very tricky. It's so tricky that it's like scary, but it's not that scary. But that's what it is. So yeah, I think I'm starting to get my head around it, like how that works and like how the ecosystem might work, like how important it is to consider like certain perspectives of the scene and then what camera angle changes we're going to choose and how to change like the dialogues and how many beats are in the dialogues. whether we want it to be super descriptive, whether we want it to be that expositional, how I'm going to transition through expositional scenes to get to certain goals that are set for the certain chapter. And maybe there's like a certain page limit so that things don't spiral out of control and then you just have like infinite things that you need to do. And then you have to think of also the compositions, like how do you simplify the compositions, but how do you make sure that they have enough elements in it to be sufficiently complex, and then make sure that you're being descriptive but not too descriptive so that you're getting the right exposition. And then understanding how that impacts the overall style of what you've created, and then how that impacts potentially distribution and marketing and strategy and how people connect with it and whether they enjoy the story and so on. And then all that's going to affect budget, which is going to affect timelines, which is going to affect how many people need to be working on it, because you might not be able to do it as a single person project, because that has to be done on a shoestring budget, and it has to be done also with a limited time frame, which is then going to limit how much of a story you can tell, how descriptive you can be, how experimental you can be, as well. Because if you're going to be more experimental, that means you're going to have to use more variations and do more post production. Like it's going to complicate post production processes. It's going to be like something that's going to create a bit of a nightmare and streamlining all the aspects that you're trying to develop together. So yeah, I'm starting to understand this though. So I don't feel too out in the woods about this. I'm starting to understand. Cool. Anyways, well, thanks for listening, and I hope you guys have fun learning, and I hope the fact that I actually put this on video for you guys means that it's interesting and you can learn stuff that normally isn't talked about. Like you'd have to work at a company to have any sort of grasp at it. But yeah, so go out there, enjoy making manga if you make manga, and have fun learning. All right, bye.